Hello and welcome back to a new fight study. Today I got a very underrated fight. That is George Foreman versus Jimmy Young. Now this is the Foreman after the Ali fight, so his self-confidence isn't as great as it was before. However, he's still the menacing George Foreman. Jimmy Young, you might have not heard of him. You see Joe Foreman there looks a little chubby. Jimmy Young, you might have not heard of him, but let me tell you, I don't know if he was a great fighter, but he was a very good fighter. This is one of my best performances, one of my best fights from range perspective, how Jimmy Young was able to play with the range against Foreman. I watched this fight maybe twice before, a while ago, so it's not fresh in my mind. However, I want to talk about some stuff that Jimmy Young does in this fight. So, more specifically, what Jimmy Young does is he changes range very well in this fight. And as you see here, he's either going to stick to Foreman or be on the outside. I'll explain that as we go a little bit more. George Foreman putting his forearm. So at this point, I think this is before George Foreman retired for his first retirement. Now Jimmy Young playing with that jab, keeps that right glove in front of his face. We've seen a few fighters that I've talked about, more specifically Tim Witherspoon, who does this style. Another guy was Barnett. I forgot his last name. I keep forgetting his. Was it Larry? No, it wasn't Larry. But he fought like this too. Now, Jimmy Young was very underrated in my opinion, especially during this time of monsters in the heavyweight division. He wasn't a big guy. He's smaller than George Foreman here. Resembles Ali a little bit. Nice jab from Foreman. And even though George Foreman wasn't in top of his career at this point, like I said, he's still very menacing. Jimmy Young turning with that jab and caught him clean. Look at that effect of that jab. Now Jimmy Young's goal is to either stay away from George Foreman at this distance right here or stick to him like glue. No in between. Nice jab. Nice double jab. Double jab, get in, and then he moves out. Keeping the right hand in front of the face. Feinting, moving, respecting George Foreman when Foreman feints. Typically my favorite fights, I don't know why, it's always the man versus the monster. Like Ali versus Foreman, Douglas versus Tyson, Ali versus Liston. When a guy goes up someone that has that killer mentality and they find a way to win, especially when they're not a killer themselves. I just want to see how hard that right hook landed, not very well. Nice jab, loose jab, sticking it out from Jimmy Young, staying on the outside of the ring and tying up George Foreman on the inside. Like this is what I was talking about for range, which is closing the gap. Now Foreman, if you ever seen him hitting the heavy bag, you know his range is like a hook range where he can throw those big punches. He's not very good at long distance, far away distance. He's not very good at close in. He wants you at that middle range, and that's what Jimmy Young doesn't let him. So Jimmy Young is far away, jabs, closes the distance, and then steps out again. There you go again, getting in close with Foreman. Calling the ref for help. And that is it for round 1. Oh, this fight was in Puerto Rico, San Juan. Jimmy Young didn't have the prettiest style. I wouldn't say he was a fan favorite, but he knew how to win a fight. And sometimes not being very pretty in the ring is just as much as bad as losing fights, because people don't want to see you fight. So even when you win in boxing, it's still showbiz. So you gotta look pretty while doing it. You gotta make it a good fight. Feinting. You see Jimmy Young always on edge, shaking, popping that jab. George Foreman talking to him. And he's the other thing I want to talk about is Jimmy Young is respecting George Foreman's feints. Of course, it's George Foreman. But, yeah. You gotta respect the big guy's feints. You can't take him as a joke. And that's something you should do with every fighter. You should always respect people's feints. Unless you know they have zero power, then who cares? Now, jab, get in close. This is what the main point of this video is, or this fight study. Is Jimmy Young pops that jab and gets under and ties up George Foreman. Now George Foreman putting his weight on his back, on Jimmy Young's back. Nice right hand by Mr. Young. Like I said, George Foreman is best at middle to close range, not very close and not very far. Jimmy Young staying far away now. And gets in close, gets back out. A fight of survival too, not just winning the fight. Jimmy Young is trying to survive these rounds also. Countering when he makes George Foreman miss. And there it is again. Throws a jab from long range. And gets in close right after. Ties him up, waits for the ref. George Foreman putting his glove in his face. And then going back to the outside. There you go, tying up George Foreman. Foreman's a big guy. Now, Jimmy Young does get hit with some punches, but he had a solid chin. Like that 1-2. Let's see if that landed clean or if Jimmy Young moved his chin with it. Oh, those look like they landed clean, but he's still standing. Putting that forearm in his neck. I don't think George Foreman was liked in this stage of his career. This is, like I said, after he lost to Ali and he was in a dark place. So he's staying on the outside, not staying close to the dangerous hooks of George Foreman and the uppercuts. And then when he gets a chance, you could see this guy jump, or those two guys jump out of their seat. When he got a chance for an opening, Jimmy Young wasn't shy to take it here. As he gets out, bang, and then gets his way out. Now Foreman is mad, of course. Jimmy Young steps back and then ties him up again. You can see the people jump out of the crowd, jump out of their seats. And like I said again, Jimmy Young wasn't the prettiest fighter, but he knew how to win this fight. Sticks a jab. Okay. Covers the eyes of George Foreman. Doesn't stay where he is. Gets slow. Steps in. And gives him a nice little hug. Now then waits for the ref to break them up. That was the end of the second round. Now, I wouldn't want to be in a ring with George Foreman even at any point of his career, when he was 45 or when he was 25. And then you see Jimmy Young staying on the outside. George Foreman trying to creep his way in, but there you go. He gets back out. Now Jimmy Young, there he goes. He steps in inside again. Young looks like he's moving to his left mostly. I'm guessing to stay away from that left hook of Foreman. Keeps him on the outside, or stays on the outside. Jimmy Young's backs are closer to the ropes, so he's the one that's on the outside of the ring. So he's trying to stay on the outside, and there you see again. He pops that jab in the face, specifically the eyes. Now, I don't know if Jimmy Young meant to do this on purpose. He touches the eyes. George Foreman's eyes are closed for that split second, and Jimmy Young is stuck to him like glue before Foreman could open his eyes. And he ties him up. Let's see if he waits for the ref. And yeah, our guess, I'll say our guess is right. He waits for the ref to break them up. If you've seen George Foreman fight other guys, or if you've seen him hit the bag, you'll know what his best distance is. It's where he can wing punches, so you can't wing punches when someone is too far out or too close. And you see that again. Pop that jab. Now it doesn't land, but he gets on the inside. And then he puts his weight on Jimmy Young. We'll see. Now Jimmy Young was a little bit of an actor against Ali. I think he kept putting his head out the ring. Oh, is that a point? Okay, so what I wanted to say before that happened was Foreman, his best distance wasn't here. And his best distance wasn't if Jimmy Young was here. It would be if Jimmy Young was approximately right here. If Jimmy Young stood right here, then Foreman could wing his hooks and uppercuts and actually land them. But as you can see here, if he winged a punch, he wouldn't be able to touch Jimmy Young. And if Jimmy Young was stuck to his chest like glue, George Foreman couldn't wing punches. So George Foreman was more of a winger, and that's more of a mid-distance fight. See Jimmy Young using his jab, trying to keep away, trying to keep at that long distance. Focus. You can't be unfocused against a guy like George Foreman for one split second of the fight. And then you see Jimmy Young get stuck or stick himself to George Foreman. Now George Foreman's using all the dirty tactics on the inside, putting his gloves in the face of Jimmy Young and all that sweet stuff. There you go again, getting close. So no mid-range. Jimmy Young is not trying to stay at mid-range with George Foreman. I've said that a million times. I'll stop saying it. Pops that jab from long distance. Gets in close. Sticks himself to George Foreman. And then pops his jab out from the outside. Now, going into this fight, I don't know the history about them, but I don't think anybody gave Jimmy Young a chance against George Foreman. But Jimmy Young was a smart guy. Nice turns Foreman. Keeps that right hand in front of his face. Gets his counter in, and then I guess that was the round. Is this round 4 now? From the side view, Jimmy Young resembles Ali a lot. Maybe it's the hair. Like from this angle. And again, stick into Foreman after he lands that jab. Now this is easy to do for we're in round 4. This is easy to do for 1 round, for 2 rounds, even for 3 rounds. But to do this for the whole fight, what Jimmy Young is doing against a guy like Foreman is truly respectable. Now Foreman catches him with a punch on the inside. Now if you see where Jimmy Young is coming in from, where he actually tries to close the distance, it's from very far away. So George Foreman, I guess, is picking up on that. And then he catches him with a little uppercut. And then Jimmy Young gets closer. But watch where Jimmy Young is jabbing. He jabs the eyes or the top of the head and gets in close. Oh, there's that winging punch, was it? Or is it more of a jump from Foreman? So I guess he could wing from far away, but he was still leaping in. Usually he's standing where he is, like he's hitting a heavy bag. And the wing doesn't get that far. That came from literally from the back of his leg, from his... And it still managed to catch Jimmy Young. And then Young gets in close, ties him up. It's a very simple fight, but very it's simple on paper what Jimmy Young's game plan is, but it's really hard to pull off when you put in all the other factors that you're fighting George Foreman, and he has that type of power. He has that type of strength. Foreman's strength. And you see Jimmy Young getting in any shot other than the jab, he's getting it in when he can. And you see him sticking to George Foreman again. George Foreman putting... I can't help but laugh when I see George Foreman do these things, because it's just like... But yeah, this is a very underrated performance that many people don't talk about. A David versus Goliath type of performance. That's what I meant to say in the beginning. Those are my favorite type of fights, when the non-powerful guy could fight the big scary guy and beat him in a fight by using his mind and some power and skill, but using his mind and confidence that he could pull it off. Self-belief. There you go, staying on the outside. I'm waiting for Foreman to wing some punches to talk about what I mean by he likes middle range. No, those were nice. That was a nice shot. So Foreman is starting to catch Jimmy Young while Jimmy Young steps in, so he jabs. And this is the distance that George Foreman... This is the winging punch I was talking about, where he just rotates his body. Watch this hand, the left hand of George Foreman. This is... If Jimmy Young would just stay right here, George Foreman would have knocked him out easy. But Jimmy Young is stepping in, and George Foreman is starting to catch Young as Young closes the distance. Young gets a body shot of his own. Now, I don't think anybody liked Foreman at this point of his career. I don't even think he liked himself. Everybody was probably waiting to see Foreman get knocked out. Nice swinging right body shot by Foreman. Now Foreman, if you want to talk about his style, he's more of a stalker. He likes to stalk his opponent. So powerful. There's a picture of him picking up a cow on his back, or walking with it. So Foreman's strength's different type of strength. And this is where George Foreman wants to be. And I talk about winging. Wing. See where he wings his punches, mid-range. Jimmy Young, he's not able, because Jimmy Young is... Oh, he got that one, actually. but he's not able to land effectively clean, effective punches. I'm not sure how old he was. I think he was still in his 20s in this fight. I'm not sure. I'd have to search that up. But I think this is the fight that he retired from, his first retirement. Popping that jab from long distance. Nice jab from Foreman. Is that Vaseline on Jimmy Young's hair? Or is that a gray spot? Nice jab. You could see the power in just the jab of Foreman. He throws very few, but when he does, you saw the one land in the first round. And you see how it's like a sledgehammer coming at you. Let's break down the technique. Let's see what George Foreman does right with his jab, what he does wrong, his style of jab. So you could see him transfer the weight from his back leg. You see that heel, his right heel pick up. And he kind of leans into the jab. And you see that power, that weight going to the left side of Foreman, the lead side. You could see him on an angle, almost on a diagonal. This angle. Most people when they jab, they're more straight up, and this foot is ahead of them over here. However, Foreman jabs over his front foot, which is something you can get away with when you're Foreman. You're not really you don't really care about being countered, I guess. But usually, if you watch technically sound fighters, their foot would be right here when they jab almost. So their foot would be under their jab, but when Foreman jabs, his foot is under his shoulder. Okay, other fighters, their foot would be around here, just a little bit ahead, and this foot would be a little bit closer. You see that sledgehammer jab land. And then he kind of like does a little, see how he kind of skips into the jab almost, so leans in and then brings his right foot up. Now he's trying to keep Jimmy Young away from gluing himself to him so he can land those punches, but let's see what happens. Is that a jab again? You can see the jab of Foreman just knocks Jimmy Young's head back. That's the counters I was talking about. Jimmy Young gets in when he can. He's not forcing to land a punch, but when he sees an opening, he takes it and then runs away with it. Like I said here, he's countering Foreman when he sees Foreman leave himself open or make a mistake. And you could see Foreman's jab again to the body. Not very technically sound speaking as a coach. If a coach saw their fighter do this, you wouldn't congratulate them. You'd tell them to work on their jab, but it's George Foreman. You can't really tell him much. So it puts a lot of power into that jab. He's almost off his right foot. And because he does that, Jimmy Young takes a chance to throw a couple shots because George Foreman is off balance. And this is where George Foreman wants to be, is right this far. But Jimmy Young is just not giving him the still target that George wants. But if you see how he that's where George Foreman wants to be, but Jimmy Young is controlling his head a little harder to get those punches off. But this is the distance. Putting that forearm on the neck, under the chin. Nice body shot by Foreman. And then now trying to stay away. Gets in close again. So out or in. Out or in, don't stay in the middle. That's, I guess, Jimmy Young's game plan for this fight. Too far to hit, too close to hit. There he goes, sticking himself to Foreman again. There was a fight I was watching where the fighter was doing this type of thing. They were sticking to themselves, waiting for the ref to break them up to the other fighter. I forgot which fight. And that's, you see what I mean? Mid distance. Every time Foreman throws a punch like that, it's always from the middle. Mid distance is like having a short jab, not a full jab in between, but a half jab in between. That's kind of mid distance. That's the same length as a hook. You can see Jimmy Young, he's not moving in or back. He does that when he closes distance, but then he's moving side to side, mostly to the left. And then sticks himself, pushes him off, gets far back. And if you're asking yourself how Foreman isn't just putting Young on the ropes, because Young is on the ropes, that's because Young is being super awkward, not staying in the same spot, always shaky, moving like that, jabbing. And that does a lot to keep someone from moving in on you, especially even a guy like George Foreman has to respect that. So that's why you don't always want to be a still target. Nice, Jimmy Young gets close, lets off some shots, gets away. Fighting Foreman's like fighting a final boss in the video game. He always got to be on point. Can't give them anything extra. And like I said, I'll say we said because we're watching this video together. Or we're doing the study together. So Jimmy Young jabs. Okay. If he stays here in this point, doesn't move his feet, doesn't move his head, doesn't jab, George Foreman's going to eat him up. Pops that jab. Gets in there. Give me a hug. Give me a hug, and then waits for the ref. I don't think there's been someone as scary as Foreman. Maybe Sonny Liston before him, and then Mike Tyson after. But in today's age, there isn't someone like George Foreman. There hasn't been in a very long time. Someone where you don't think you might get knocked out, but you might get seriously hurt. I don't think there's ever any. Since Tyson, maybe, I don't think anybody's had the effect of Foreman. See right there, see that swinging punch of Foreman? It's a little bit farther out. He's moving in as he throws it. Jimmy Young just gets away from that. That was one of Foreman's best punches, which was the body shot, that right hook to the body. Let's see why everybody's jumping up and down. I guess for those punches. And any punch that Jimmy Young lands and survives it, he's done something good, so I think the crowd's going to like that. Nice. Uppercut, left hook, move out. take what you can and get out. You can't get greedy with Foreman after you land a punch. And I'll call that time for this part of the fight study. So the couple things I want to touch on what Jimmy Young was doing, which was I talked about a lot, was jabs from the outside, stays on the outside too far for the medium range for Foreman to throw his looping punches. And then when Foreman is getting close, or when Jimmy Young feels like he should, pops that jab to the face, to the eyes on an upward angle, and then comes in close, ties up Foreman, waits for the ref to break them up. Okay, so he's not staying in mid-range against a very dangerous guy. Waits for the ref to break them up. When he can, he gets in a right hand or an uppercut or a hook. Jimmy Young does. He doesn't get greedy, but he lands whatever he can when he sees an opening, and he quickly either gets out or grabs Foreman again. One thing against dangerous fighters, even if you land one or two good punches, you can't get greedy. You got to always have that respect for them. So you land something, tie them up, or get away back to your jab. So you respect them. Don't get greedy with your punches, because that's when you get caught. We're talking about Foreman's most effective range, which is mid-range, where he could throw those looping shots. Foreman's jab isn't the most technical, but it is George Foreman, so when you are George Foreman, you don't need a very technical jab. George Foreman pushing and putting his elbow under the chin of Jimmy Young, putting his glove on him. Kind of dirty stuff. That's kind of funny. And yeah, a very underrated fight. I'll be back with part 2. Thank you for watching if you did. And yeah, have a great day. Bye.